All right, so you sent this YouTube conversation with Marco Montemagno, and wow, he and his guests really get into it about Bitcoin and AI
Mm.
and like what's coming next. I'm ready to deep dive into all of this.
Yeah, you can really tell that Montemagno is pumped about this stuff. That
Yeah.
his energy is kind of contagious.
Yeah, for sure. So right away they hit us with some big Bitcoin news. Bitcoin hit $100,000. I
Wow.
mean, it's like you can hear Montemagno celebrating, even though it's just a video.
Yeah.
And get this, he actually predicted this like a year ago.
Really?
Yeah, he like wrote it on his kitchen whiteboard.
Uh-huh. That's
I
awesome.
know. But his partner, I mean, she wasn't so sure about it at the time.
I can imagine.
But think about it. This price, it's a big deal, right? I mean, for those people who are into Bitcoin like way back when nobody really knew what it was, it shows that they were onto something.
Absolutely. It validates them in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And then they bring up Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin.
Right.
And the fact that all of Satoshi's Bitcoin wallets, like from the beginning, they haven't been touched.
Yeah.
And they're estimated to hold 1 million Bitcoin. That's worth, get this, $100 billion today.
Yeah. That's just an insane amount of money. And it really highlights the different ways people approach Bitcoin.
Like how?
Well, some people, they're in it for the long haul. They're hodlers, as they say, which means like they're holding on to their Bitcoin as a long-term investment. But then you have others, they're day traders. They're just trying to make quick profits by buying and selling based on the price swings. You know,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
it's a completely different mindset, really.
And speaking of long-term thinking, they shared this story about Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase. He said if you had just put $100 into Bitcoin back in 2012,
Wow.
it would be worth like $1.5 million today.
Hmm.
But $100 that you just held on to, well, it would have actually lost value because of inflation.
That's a pretty stark contrast. And it makes you think, are we wired to kind of dismiss the unconventional? Especially when it comes to new technologies. And how can we learn from those people who saw Bitcoin's potential before everyone else?
Yeah. And they talk about this pattern throughout history, right? Like when any new technology comes along, at first there's this wave of skepticism.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
like people just resist change. Montemagno even told this story about how he met with some journalists and they refused to publish anything online because they consider themselves like real journalists.
Wow. Real.
I know it sounds crazy now, but that was their mindset back then.
Yeah, it's that classic resistance to change. And it makes me think about Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft. He totally dismissed the iPhone.
No.
And look how that turned out. Even really smart people can misjudge the potential of disruptive technologies, you know?
So how can we train ourselves to spot those truly innovative ideas, the ones that are going to change everything?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right? It's not always easy. But maybe if we shift gears and talk about OpenAI for a bit, they mentioned some pretty incredible stats. OpenAI has like 300 million weekly active users,
Wow.
a billion daily prompts. And get this, 1.3 million developers are actually building on their platform.
Okay, now those are some serious numbers. But then there's the whole Elon Musk drama, right? He's suing OpenAI, claiming that they've kind of abandoned their original nonprofit mission.
Yeah. There's definitely tension there. And you can see both sides. Musk is worried that OpenAI is becoming too focused on making money, putting profits ahead of benefiting humanity. But then others argue that OpenAI needs investments to stay competitive, especially with companies like Google pouring tons of money into AI research.
That makes sense. But this lawsuit, I mean, it's fascinating. Makes you wonder, is OpenAI still on the right track? Do you think maybe Musk is trying to like slow OpenAI down while he's developing his own AI stuff?
It's a good question. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising, right? Musk is a super competitive guy. And speaking of OpenAI's influence, they mentioned that their CEO, Sam Altman, he joined the advisory board of San Francisco.
Really?
Yeah, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, it suggests that AI is starting to have a real impact on government and policy.
That's kind of wild to think about. Like AI is moving beyond just technology and into like positions of leadership.
Exactly. And then they talk about vertical AI, which is essentially AI that's specifically designed for certain industries.
Oh, I see. So like custom-made AI.
Yeah, exactly. And they even mention how researchers are using the video game Grand Theft Auto to train AI for simulating things like crowd behavior and traffic flow.
Wait, they're using Grand Theft Auto? That's so cool. But I mean, how does that even work?
Well, it's called reinforcement learning. It basically allows AI to learn through trial and error in a simulated environment. So they can test out different scenarios and see what works best without having to do it in the real world.
That's pretty smart. So it's like a virtual playground for AI.
Exactly. And they discussed this research paper about simulating human behavior using AI. Apparently, they did an experiment where AI could predict the responses of real people with an 85% accuracy rate.
Wow. But that also sounds kind of scary, right? Like, could this technology be used to manipulate people?
It's a legitimate concern. They talked about how it could be used to create these hyper-realistic focus groups that don't actually reflect real people's opinions, or even to sway public opinion by predicting how people will react to certain information.
So it's like a tool that could be used for good or bad.
Right. And then they took it a step further. They imagined having these personalized AI clones that could vote in elections or give feedback on public proposals based on your values.
That's wild. I mean, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard to say.
It's a really thought-provoking idea that makes you question what it means to participate in a democracy, you know? And then they bring up Meta's plan to build this massive undersea cable. It's going to be 40,000 kilometers long.
I can't even wrap my head around that distance. That's longer than the circumference of the Earth. But why are they doing this?
Well, it's all about infrastructure. They talk about how the internet, even though it feels kind of invisible, it relies on these physical cables to carry data all over the world. And Meta's investment shows just how important it is to control this infrastructure.
I see, yeah. So it's not just about the technology itself, but also the physical networks that make it all work.
Right. And it's not just Meta doing this. Google's been building its own undersea cable empire for years, which raises some concerns, you know? Are we heading towards a future where just a few powerful companies control the flow of information online?
That's a scary thought. What would that mean for the internet as we know it?
Well, they talked about the potential impact on net neutrality, which is the idea that all internet traffic should be treated equally. If companies like Meta and Google have their own dedicated cables, could they create a fast lane for their data while everyone else is stuck in the slow lane?
That would be a huge problem. It would create a digital divide, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like some people would have access to this super fast internet, while others are left behind.
Exactly. And it would undermine the whole idea of an open and accessible internet for everyone.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But it's important that we're having these conversations, right? So that we can be aware of what's happening and maybe even do something about it.
Absolutely. We need to be informed and engaged if we want to shape the future of the internet. You know, going back to what we were discussing about simulating human behavior with AI, it really makes you think about where the line is with this kind of technology.
It's almost like science fiction.
Right.
They talked about that study where they were able to use AI to predict how real people would respond to something. And they were right, like 85% of the time.
85%, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. And a little scary, too. What if they use that for, like, politics or advertising? It would be crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, you could totally see how that could be used to manipulate people, like creating these super realistic focus groups that don't actually represent anyone.
Or even spreading misinformation, right? Like, if they
Yeah.
know exactly how people will react to something.
Exactly. And then they talked about the idea of having these personal AI clones. Like, imagine an AI version of you that votes in elections or gives feedback on public proposals based on what it thinks you would want.
That's a really wild concept. Like, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Would it make democracy more efficient? Or would it take away people's voices?
It's a tough question. It really makes you think about what it means to participate in a democracy. You know, like, is it just about casting a vote or is it about something more?
It's deep, man. But okay, let's shift gears for a second and talk about that crazy undersea cable that Meta is building.
Oh, yeah, the one that's going to be like 40,000 kilometers long.
Longer than the circumference of the Earth. I still can't believe that. It's just mind-blowing.
It really shows how much we rely on this physical infrastructure, even for something that feels as intangible as the internet.
Right. Like all those cables under the ocean carrying all that data. And Meta's not the only one doing this. Google's been building its own undersea cable network for years.
Which makes you wonder, you know, like, are we heading towards a future where just a few powerful companies control all of the information online?
That would be bad.
Yeah, and they talked about how this could affect net neutrality.
Look at that.
Net neutrality is the idea that all internet traffic should be treated equally. So, like, your internet provider shouldn't be able to slow down certain websites or give preferential treatment to others.
Oh, I see. So it's like a level playing field for the internet.
Right. But if companies like Meta and Google have their own private cables, could they create a fast lane for their own data while everyone else is stuck in the slow lane?
That would be so unfair. It would create a digital divide where some people have access to this super fast internet and others are left behind.
Exactly. And it would go against the whole principle of an open and accessible internet for everyone.
I think it's important that people are aware of this. Like these issues are really important for the future of the internet.
Absolutely. And we need to be having these conversations and making sure that we're not just letting these big companies dictate how the internet works.
Right. It's our internet too, right?
Exactly.
They also brought up this funny story about how Montemagno met with these journalists back in the day, and they totally refused to publish anything online. They thought it was like beneath them or something.
Uh-huh. I mean, it's funny now, but it shows how much things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, now it's like the opposite. Everyone wants to be online.
Right. But it's a good reminder that what seems obvious and inevitable today might have been considered totally crazy or impossible not that long ago.
It makes you wonder, like, what things that seem crazy today will be totally normal in the future, you know?
Right. Like, what's the next big thing that people are going to resist at first, but then embrace later on?
I guess we'll have to wait and see. But this whole conversation has been really thought-provoking. It makes you realize that the future of technology isn't set in stone. It's something that we're all creating together through the choices we make.
Exactly. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we're creating a future that we actually want to live in.
Okay, so we're back. And I'm really curious to hear about those lighter anecdotes you mentioned, especially within the context of this lawsuit between Elon Musk and OpenAI. It just seems like there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, you can tell that there's some real tension there. On one hand, you have Musk arguing that OpenAI has strayed from its original mission, like they're becoming too focused on profits instead of, benefiting humanity.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, there's the argument that, OpenAI needs these investments to stay competitive. I mean, Google and Microsoft are pouring tons of money into AI.
It's like they have to play the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough spot to be in. And then they mention that there are over 1.3 million developers building on OpenAI's platform. Like, think about that for a second.
That's a lot of people.
It's huge. It means that OpenAI is becoming more than just a research lab. They're becoming a platform.
Like a platform for other companies to build their own AI stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like, how Apple created the App Store. OpenAI could become this central hub for all these different AI applications and services.
That's interesting. But does that mean they're becoming too powerful?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And they even suggested that this whole lawsuit with Musk, it might be a strategic move on his part. Like maybe he's trying to slow OpenAI down while he's building his own AI stuff.
He's playing chess, huh?
Maybe. And then they bring up something that seems totally unrelated, but it's actually connected to this whole conversation. Remember that massive undersea cable that Meta's building?
Oh, yeah, the one that's longer than the Earth's circumference.
That one. It just shows you the scale of this. Like, the internet might seem intangible, but it relies on this massive physical infrastructure.
Yeah, it's all those cables under the ocean that are carrying all the data.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, who controls all of that? Who controls the flow of information?
Yeah, they talked about net neutrality, right?
Right. Like, what happens if these big companies with their own private cables, what if they create a fast lane for their data while everyone else is stuck in the slow lane?
It's like paying for a better internet.
Kind of. And it would create this digital divide, right? Where some people have access to all this information and speed and others are left behind.
Yeah, that would be a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's not just about speed, it's about control, right?
Yeah,
Like who gets to decide what information we see and how fast we see it?
exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. We need to be aware of what's happening and we need to be actively involved in shaping the future of the internet.
We can't just sit back and let it happen, right?
No, we can't. We need to be informed, we need to be engaged, and we need to be willing to speak up for the kind of internet that we want.
I like that. An internet for everyone.
Exactly. An internet that's open, accessible, and fair.
This whole conversation has been amazing. It's given me so much to think about, and I really feel like I have a better understanding of what's at stake as we move into this future with AI and all these crazy technologies. Thanks for sharing this with me.
Of course. And remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we create.
That's a great point to end on. I think we all need to remember that.